Okay, well, my name is Alex Binnie, and I'm an artist who tattoos. And I've been around tattooing for many years. I got my first tattoo when I was 17, in the 70s. That shows how old I am. But back when tattooing was not a thing that artsy middle-class people did. Back then, it was much more, you know, it was different. It was different from now, for sure. So. I don't know. I remember seeing tattoos when I was quite young, not in my family. I come from a sort of middle class kind of intellectual family, maybe. My dad was a school teacher and my mum was a social worker. So they were liberal, not intellectuals, but certainly not working class. So back then, tattooing was definitely working class, generally speaking. So I didn't see any tattoos in my family or anything. I wasn't surrounded by them, but I remember seeing tattoos when I was relatively young, like in my young teens. I remember first sort of seeing them, clocking them, and being aware of them. And as it is with a lot of tattoo people, when you first see them, you're like, there's something that, hooks into you. Yeah, so there you go. So I got a couple of tattoos then, and then being what it was, the tattoo world, then I went to art school and I thought about tattooing quite a lot. And I went into tattoo shops a few times and always thought, I remember thinking, either I thought at the time or looking back at it now, my memory is, I remember thinking, this can only get better, because it was a bit shit at the time. Really, and most of the tattoo shops I went into to have a little look, I just thought, it's not really for me. I got two when I was 17, and then I took a break till my mid-20s, and then then things were starting to change. It was the 80s by now. There's a few more glimmers of what was about to happen, So anyway, so that's me getting tattooed. Yeah, so I started tattooing in the 80s. So I was, art guy, and I'd been to art school, and was doing music and performance art and, weird stuff. And tattooing was always kind of on the periphery and in my head. And then I started getting tattooed a little bit with my own designs, and it started to happen. And then there was the piercing thing, and I was involved in sort of underground, what they would call industrial culture. I was on the fringes of. Funnily enough, I just bumped into an old friend of mine who was in Coil, if anyone's heard of Coil. I bumped into him today when I went out to get my bicycle. So I was on the fringes of that world, basically. And that's who my first clients were, predominantly. My own personal closer friends, and then wider people from that world that I didn't know so well, from the kind of underground industrial music, arts, gay, underground. So that was my first client base, really, and so I started with them when tattooing was a bit more like out there. Back then, like, straight people didn't really get tattooed. I mean, if you were working class and straight, by straight I don't necessarily mean gay, I mean straight, in your mind, you know what I mean? Normal, whatever you might want to take by straight to mean. But working class straight people got tattooed, but, more avant-garde people, it was either you're working class, you're military, whatever, or it was just starting to happen with the kind of underground, artsy crowd. So that they were my clients. From there, I went to America. So my big break really was I met various people, and I went to America to get tattooed by Leo Zulueta, who's, if you've heard of him, and this was back in the days when you wrote letters to people, obviously, and I'm sure Leo hadn't tattooed anybody from as far away as England before. I'm sure he was quite bemused, but I'd been getting tattooed in London. By then wasn't heavily tattooed, but I'd been tattooed by, George Bone and Mr. Sebastian and various people in London. Not loads, but it was starting to happen. So I went to LA, I met this woman, Elaine, who was a piercer who ran the Gauntlet piercing shop in Los Angeles, which was the first piercing shop in the world, really, the first street piercing shop in the world. So I met her at a convention in Amsterdam, and we got friendly, and then I went to America, got tattooed by Leo, and then me and Elaine got very friendly. And I ended up moving there so I could be with Elaine, and I started tattooing in LA, so I did a couple of years in LA in early 90s, like 91 to 93 roughly. I was in LA, and it was for me as a sort of tattoo guy, it was unbelievable, because there was nothing like that happening in England or anywhere in Europe, really. No way. It was all happening over there. You know, it was this was the West Coast of America, which, as we knew, these were kind of Ed Hardy's sort of children in a sense. It was all blossoming there, and there were younger people my age who were tattoo artists. And in London there was almost no one my age. It was like all the other tattoo artists, and there weren't that many that I even remotely knew, were all either were or felt a lot older than me, or they weren't what I would call my people. So LA, so there I'm in LA, all young and fresh. I was kind of 30-ish. Hanging out with Elaine and tattooing people in LA and meeting loads of people, and I was the English guy, and I was, as out there as they were in terms of big ears, back of the ear plug, big ears and tattooing and what have you, and so it was great. I was welcomed with open arms, and I met a lot of people. I met a lot of people very quickly. And tattooed a lot of interesting people, including, who is still a good friend and is quite well known, is the performance artist Ron Athey, who I got to know very well. And of course I'd done performance art at art school. I was kind of used to that whole world, and he was performing and being a performance artist, and he'd been tattooed by Leo, and he knew a lot of people, and I tattooed his throat. Actually, I did a big throat piece on Ron quite early on. I think that was the first tattoo I did on Ron. I guess we hit it off. I just took it for granted. He's great, we liked each other, tattooed my throat, sure, let's do it. I don't think, without wanting to be big-headed, I don't think anyone had done a Borneo throat piece on anyone like that, apart from in Borneo. And mine wasn't even that Borneo-ish, really. It was enormous, really. So it was kind of mad, and Ron knew a lot of people, and I got to know a lot of people, and it was great. So there I was in LA, tattooing away. It was a great time. I mean, Ron was great, and all that crowd were great, and like I said, we were all relatively young. I mean, same sort of age, and we were all excited because it was new. It was new then, in both, LA. It was just new, and therefore the crowd. Those are the days when, if you walked around the street and you saw someone with interesting tattoos, you'd stop and talk to them, because there was so few of them around, and you'd almost certainly know someone that they knew or who tattooed them or whatever. And my friend, a piercer that I knew from London, actually weirdly she's American, but she'd been living in London for years, and I knew her before I went out there. She was piercing, and we were in good communication, and we were like, come on, let's do it. We'll start a shop in London. It'll be perfect. It'll be perfect timing, man. There'll be no one. There'll be nothing. There's nothing going on. We'll be the first on the scene. It all made sense then, and in retrospect, it all made sense now. I mean, we literally were. We were literally the first on the scene, and it's almost like I actually slightly got this idea in my head from something Ed Hardy said when I read it in an interview. He said he went to Vancouver from San Francisco in the beginning of his career, and he said it was like I'd been in the future. San Francisco was ahead of Vancouver. I knew I could see the future, and so I felt like that coming back to London. I was like, I can see the future, because it was happening in LA, it was happening in San Francisco. The shops, the kind of cooler fashion art people getting tattooed. All that stuff was happening in LA, and it wasn't happening in London yet. And me and Tina were like, right, let's do it. We'll start a shop in London, and we're going to fucking clean up. I started Interview in '93 with Tina. Within a year or two, she'd left. within 6 months, I got my friend Curly, who you might have heard of, came to work with me because I knew Curly from before. That's a whole other story, but whatever, another time. But I already knew Curly, and within a few months of me starting to interview, because it was just me and Tina, I was like, Curly, well, I can't cope. We're way too. It just took off. I was like, I can't do it. We're way too busy. You better come. And I was like, he's like, but I haven't. I'm like, Curly, shut up. Just come. You can do it, man. It's fine. He'd hardly tattooed. He tattooed at home a bit, but you can. You know, I knew Curly obviously was going to be good because Curly's Curly, and we got on and we were like mates. I was like, come on, get down here now, and we'll do it. So he did, and then it just. You know, it just basically grew from there. It just snowballed. It just snowballed. Because at the time, you know, I mean, it sounds like I'm being a right old big head, but it was true. You know, there wasn't anything else like us. And there was a lot of people that were into it. Basically, we had the clients. The whole underground tattooing thing was changing fast. You know, it was changing from being this... You know, nearly all of it was one guy, you know, in his weird little room, tattooing, you know, his people and being all like, you know, fuck off. We don't like weirdos. We don't like gays. We don't like, you know, we don't like, you know, we just good, you know, that. London was like that. And then we were there, and suddenly we had this great big shop. Suddenly it was like me and Curly, and then very quickly other people as well. And it was like, yeah, come and hang out. Yeah, we'll party, hang out, get tattooed, talk shit, you know, be friendly to each other. I knew, this shop as well, I started with a business partner. Both of my shops, I had a business partner at the beginning. So this shop too, I had a business partner. And he was a local tattooer that I knew through friends. And he was frustrated with where he was, and I said, let's start Into You Too in Brighton. And he said, yes, let's. So we did. So this was, Into You was 93, this was 2005, so 12 years later. So 12 years later, after having London, and I still had London at the time, I started this with my friend Jason, and it was called Into You Too, because we had Into You in London and Into You Too. It's almost too much to bear, but it was called Into You Too. So yeah, so we started this shop and we got this place, and that's how it happened. So I changed the name to 1770 after London closed, which is 2016. I never really liked the name, and also it was, even though I didn't really like the name, it was definitely the London shop, and I didn't want people to think that this was that shop, because it wasn't. It was different. So I said to Jason, I want to change the name. And he said, fine. And in fact, within a year or two, he'd left, not because of any falling out, but he had a whole other thing he wanted to do, and it worked out. And you know, my London shop had gone. So in the early days, I didn't really have an enormous amount to do with it here. That was the deal. I slightly lent my name and the name of the shop, and he, you know, got on with it. So yeah, so we changed the name to 1770, and then I've had this ever since then. Absolutely. No matter how commercialized and trivialized tattooing seems to become, they can't really take it away, because it is actually always the same thing, which is, you know, marking the body with ink and needles and skin and pain and all that stuff. No matter, you know, so that can never change. You know, the whole idea we're going to tattoo, you know, with machines or whatever, even if they did it with a machine, which they're never gonna, but it's still, I mean, unless they can do it with a machine and painlessly, then it's not tattooing. And it won't even be called tattooing. If you could manage to put an image on someone's skin with the machine, with no pain, and no, you know, and instantaneously, that wouldn't be a tattoo. It really wouldn't. And I don't think they would even call it a tattoo. Because tattooing clearly is permanent, obviously, but it takes time, it does hurt. You've got to be with the person to have it done. You've got a one-on-one relationship with that person. I think none of that can go, no matter how big it's gotten in terms of the numbers of people that are getting it. If it's a beautiful thing, which it is, why would we want to keep it to just us? We have to be hippie and let everybody else have part of it too. Surely, come on. Alternative culture, you know, with this music, art, what have you, has got that instinct, oh, fuck you, this is just for us, you can't be a part of this. You know, high fashion's money. That's a good way of separating people off. We got a lot of money, we can afford this shit and you can't. That's a good way of saying fuck off. But really, it shouldn't be like that, should it? Life should be for everybody and we should all have a way of, you know, joining in. So ultimately, I find it tricky that, you know, a bunch of idiots get tattooed, you know, but they should be allowed. It's obviously there. It's a question of how much you want to acknowledge it. And some people want to acknowledge it to different levels. Now, I personally, possibly from my generation, don't want to, in general, I don't overdo it in that area because it's a bit like, oh God, cringy. But now there are some tattooers that are fully doing, you know, sacred ritualistic tattooing. I know there's a couple and I know I've seen it and I might even know a little bit. And it's cool if it works for them and it's, you know, it's not just a marketing strategy, which it probably is, but whatever, then because of course it's there. All that stuff is in there. I mean, tattooing is what you make of it in many ways and everyone can use it in different ways. I mean, there's something that I always remember, one of my things that I've said before, that Thomas, not the Thomas you interviewed, what I call my Thomas, who's in Japan now. I remember him saying once about a client of his, they want to have the tattoo, but they don't want to get the tattoo. You know, and that's why now I'm a little bit anti the fucking cream and the endless painkillers and shit like that, because we never had that when I was getting all my stuff. We never had that. We had to take drugs. You know, ritualistic tattooing, it's not about what it looks like. It's not just about what it looks like. It's beyond what it looks like. And we all know that. If we're quite heavily tattooed, we're all like, we know who did what and when it was done, and that is more important than what it looks like. All art, I've realised, is, you know, if you go to a big museum, I mean, going a long way back, there's eras of painting and art where it's really good and really well done and all this stuff, but it's so boring. It's so boring. It's meaningless. So, you know, really, you know, more contemporary art is all about who did it and the story behind it, not just what it looks like. It's just about what it looks like. That's like Marcel Duchamp, sorry to do such a heavy art name drop, but Marcel Duchamp, when he said, like, it's about, like, you know, when it's not just about the eyes, when you realise it's not just about the eyes, it's about the brain. It's about how you think about it. When he, like, turned it around towards that, you know, that's when art got interesting to a degree. I guess the most deeply, unless you're, of course, the ultimate is, of course, when you're handpicking yourself, then you haven't even got the client. But if the minute you've got a client, it's the two of you, and I guess, you know, that moment in time when ideally time slips away and it's just you and the client and you're in that space, whether it's in a private room or a crowded convention, which I guess is fine too, because no matter how many other people are around you, in that moment, it's just you and the client. And that is a magical moment, you know. In terms of the meditation, yogic type stuff, which is what they call single pointedness, you know, the single point is the point of your needle. And when you and the client are both, when you're like tattooing the roof of someone's mouth, there's only one place both of you are, and that place is the end of that needle, because for them, they can feel it, and they're thinking, and for you, you've got to get it right. So you're both absolutely joined. You're joined in the point where the needle is touching the flesh or penetrating the flesh. That's the point you're like together. You're the two of you, and there's only two of you. change is fine, change is good, but I mean, yeah, so I'm done with that. I've done the boss thing, and I'm done being I mean, I never even, I mean, you know, I love tattooing, and it's been part of my life, and it's given me so much. I mean, I love tattooing, of course I do, and I'm tattooed, and, you know, one of the reasons I got my face done probably was because I knew that I was going to come towards the end of it, but I didn't just want to be a straight guy. I still wanted to be visibly tattooed, no matter what other things I do, which are many, and I won't go into them, but I've got other stuff to do, trust me. But I'm a tattoo guy. You know, I'm a tattoo guy. There's obviously places to go with tattooing, but I would think they're pretty fucking hard to find now. And actually, Michel Savaglio, who you interviewed earlier, I, for a long while, thought he's one of the few that really is doing something a bit different, because there's not many that are. And the reason there's not many that are is because there's not many little gaps to find that's still to be done. I mean, we were so lucky when I first got into it, we were so lucky because everything needed to be done. There was almost nothing that, you know, nothing had been done, almost. You know, it was so much open space to explore and play around with. Now, there's much less. So for people to find individual paths is hard for sure. And I think, unfortunately, now that tattooing has frankly become part of the mainstream and got quite commercial, and every fucker's jumping on the bandwagon and what have you, you know, an intelligent tattooer that wants to make money is going to not follow their heart. They're going to follow the market. And let's face it, fine art, fashion, tattooing, I don't know what else, various forms of media, they're kind of all the same really now. It's just business. There's these business guys up top, you know, pulling the strings to a degree for sure. Even in tattooing now, with all the TV and all this kind of rubbish, do you know what I mean? So tattooing is a personal, this is why tattooing remains unique, is that it's a personal interaction. And when you get into the whole craft thing, which we haven't even talked about that, but that was one of my, as a kind of ex-art guy, ex-art student, art world guy, back then, me and a couple of friends of mine, who, you know, one of them's gone on very well in the craft world. You know, that's just one of the, we used to talk about that as a kind of conceptual idea. You know, we're not a painter, a boring, you know, we're a crafts person. The idea of craft and art and what have you, you know, as a kind of attitude, for want of a better word. I mean, one of the main things that I always got from the punk rock era was the whole idea of attitude. That was the whole idea in punk rock. You'd say, we can't play our instruments, but it's the attitude. It's the attitude that counts. You know, fuck all that being able to play well type thing. That was the punk rock ethos, wasn't it? It was the attitude, the personality. In other words, you shining through in a sense. You're saying that, you know, I don't care if I can't play, who cares? Or I'm on, you know, I've got something to give outside of whether I can play or not. And the same is true of probably every art form, really. I did my best work when I was still getting tattooed. And I don't get tattooed anymore because A, I'm full and I don't want to do the second layer all over. Forget it, I'm not curly. And anyway, it hurts too much, la-di-da. But I think when I was fully engaged in the process, getting tattooed and tattooing people, you know, then that was probably when I was at my peak. I mean, this is one of my semi-rules now, not for me, but I think it should be a rule for all tattoo artists, is you don't tattoo somebody else that you haven't got tattooed yourself. So don't do someone's fucking back piece if you haven't got a back piece yourself. If you haven't got a back piece yourself, you say to the guy, listen, I haven't got my back done, man. I think you should get it done by my friend in my shop. He's got his back done. He's got a really cool back piece. He's really cool. Get it done by him. He knows. When he's drilling into your kidneys, he's had his kidneys drilled into. He's been there. That to me makes sense. Because that's like in your marathon or whatever, that's like a swimming coach saying, swim round the pier in icy weather 3 times, which is what Adam does, but he hasn't done it himself. All right, a rule for cool tattooers: don't tattoo what you haven't got tattooed yourself.